Okay, so good evening, ladies and gents. This is Emmett, the host of the Resolving Reality podcast and the author of the book, Red Pandemic, The Global Marxist Cult. Check out the new website, emmettconnor.com. It's got all my content up there, video and audio content going back to 2018, if you can believe that. Also have a presence on Spotify and Apple Podcasts too. So moving forward and building the project, etc., etc. So this evening, my guest is an excellent, prolific analyst and speaker. He's regarded as an expert in one of my favorite subjects, which is communism. His website is newdiscourses.com, and he has a YouTube channel of the same name. So you click on his profile here on X, that'll take you through to the website. All of his links are there. So it's, of course, Mr. James Lindsay. James, good evening. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
No worries, man. Good to speak to you again. And this is actually probably the third time we've spoken. So I spoke to you once in an Irish space a couple of years ago. And of course, you were on the podcast earlier this year too. So that was a great comprehensive discussion. Again, like I said earlier, I'd highly recommend that for people who haven't seen it. So if you go to the website, it's on the podcast page. Because we kind of covered a lot of the more basic kind of stuff last time, James, I thought we'd take things in a few different directions here. But first of all, tell us about, you had some kind of, you got some plans coming up. You think you mentioned you were going to do like an educational boat cruise or something. Tell us about that.
Yeah, James on a boat. So New Discourses, that's obviously, like you said a minute ago, my company, we're going to host a study cruise in November, the 15th through the 22nd. It will depart from Tampa, Florida, and do some Caribbean sailing. And each day we will have a session or two, ranging between 60 and 90 minutes with either myself or Mike O'Fallon. Some of it will be Q&A, some of it will be kind of group discussion or panel or whatever, and then, presentation. So the idea will be to come on a cruise. It's a vacation. It's a regular cruise. We don't own the boat. We aren't taking over the boat. So if you want to go like do vacation stuff, come do vacation stuff, have fun. That's the point. Then, we'll have these lectures and we hanging out, throughout the day and in the evening and so on. No big deal. Should be fun. And it's already got a pretty good crew signed up. So I think it's going to be good. Like I said, it's the 15th through the 22nd of November, and everybody who wants to come is welcome. We should have a really nice week.
That sounds awesome. And, I was talking to one of our comrades. I don't use the word comrades, but she's one of our comrades in the fight against communism, G. Van Fleet. And I was saying to her, James has that idea about the boat. And I had a theory that you want to do it on a boat so that people can't escape, because you can program them on the boat to be like anti-communists when they can't get away. Was that part of the thinking?
Yeah, I was really looking forward to, a lot of people are like, wow, does James want to be stuck on a boat with us? And it's like, no, you're going to be stuck on a boat with me. Let's have a good time. And so, no, I mean, it's just going to be a good time, though. We're going to go have kind of relaxed thing. Mike O'Fallon's travel company is doing it. If you don't know, he's the co-owner of New Discourses with me, but he owns another company, travel company. They've done, I think, over 100, I don't know, hundreds of these for different groups, some very, very small, some very, very large, hundreds of people going on a study cruise, something they've done a bunch of times. They're pretty good at it, and it's always a good time. I went on a kind of test cruise with them that I wasn't involved in a couple of years ago, Caribbean cruise also. We had a pretty good time. It was another group that was doing all the sessions, and my wife and I just kind of went on, vacation is approximately the right word, but it's a lot of fun.
That's brilliant. What a great idea, and why not? The Caribbean is just down the road, geographically speaking. So that sounds like a great time indeed, and obviously educational and inspirational as well, hopefully for people. And I was thinking as well, we can warm up to the more serious stuff. So my second talking point here is, there's a kind of a rumor going around that you're like a secret spy working for the CCP or something like that. For the listeners, James put up a 6-7 paragraph post detailing how he was really a spy, and me being tired on about 2 hours sleep. I read the first paragraph and I thought, oh my God, this is a confession here. And the second paragraph, I kind of still had me, but the third paragraph, I realized I'd been duped. I confessed this to James, but so you telling me that you're not really a spy, James, is what I'm trying to say.
No, and although some of the points in that so-called confession are true, we did train what you might call 吃风 which means eating skill. We definitely had quite a bit of juro jiaozi, which means pork dumpling. I did not have a professor called Da Yinjing, uh, which would be Professor Big Penis. I did not have such a thing. That was made up. That was a joke, actually. Some people tell jokes and they're funny, but the woke are humorless and don't get them. And lo and behold, my code name was not Pungda, and I do know what Pungda means. It means fat. And so I'm like even self-effacing. But no, I'm not a CCP spy. I went to China a number of times, hence the big sword, which came from China in the 2010s and trained martial arts. Not subversion, not how to take over a conservative movement and ruin it from within by voting for Obama or something. I don't know, whatever the thing is today that they're mad about. I just went over there and trained martial arts like a lot of people do, and it was fun.
Nice, good. I'm glad we cleared that up. I don't want you to get in trouble, people to get the wrong idea about you. So it was good that we kind of sorted that out. So kind of to dive in, like I said to people earlier, we kind of covered some of the more basics of different things in the podcast chat we did. So we can move into some different areas. And again, before we get rolling, if people wouldn't mind, please do quote repost the space or repost the space if you don't mind. So, okay, James, what's your assessment? Because I kind of feel a sympathy for anybody who's analysing the communism problem around the world, because you're constantly shouting into the abyss, it seems. I know you've been doing this for quite a while. Considering everything that's going on, do you think there's any sort of an improvement in the situation in the States when it comes to, the general awareness of the communism problem?
Yeah, actually, I do. Certainly, if we speak in these very broad brush terms of right and left or conservative movement or whatever, the right wing side, the conservative movement, is certainly much more aware, much more articulate. People are actually correctly referencing the Marxist roots. They're talking about the relevance of critical theory. This shift to what is sometimes now being called woke 2 or woke 2.0, following the DSA is not it's not taking us by surprise, I guess is the way to put it. From 2015 to 2020, going into 21. I mean, during 21, I went around, I got invited all over the freaking country to speak about critical race theory in 2021. At some point, I was thinking to myself, if I have to talk about critical race theory one more time, I'm going to jump off a bridge. But everybody wanted me to come talk about critical race theory. What is it? What is it? And I was like, well, there's this thing called critical theory. It's a kind of Marxism. And if you take the word race out of critical race theory, you get critical theory. And here's the person who named it saying that it's because she was a critical theorist that she called it critical race theory. And like all this, and people just could not get it. There were like kind of two kinds of, we'll say, patriots. They're the kinds that were like, yep, all the way, it's Marxist. That's it. Let's go. And then there were they were a little like heavy on that. And then there were people that just could not fathom that Marxism was here or it wasn't economic enough. A lot of the guys that became post-liberals were making the argument, like Paul Gottfried still makes the argument, that Marxism is strictly a economic phenomenon and should not be thought of in terms of these cultural terms, which completely like loses the whole plot of Western Marxism through the entirety of the 20th century. Like it's like you completely forgot the main part of the story or whatever. But at any rate, that's not the case now. People are attuned to it. We were so far with our pants down in 15 through 20 that even in 21 going into 22, people couldn't grasp even the basics. And now, that's not the case. So as they switch to this radical DSA, focusing on material issues, that means financial issues, it means going back to the economic side of things, while dragging the kind of cultural issues along in tow behind. They focus very heavily in this on post-colonial theory, which was not big in the first wave of woke in the US. People are hip to it. They just kind of know what's going on. And this is also stretching into the Democrat side of the aisle. I have friends that I've made, here and there doing different events who are Democrats, who are at least skeptical of certain things, worried about certain things that they're seeing. And they were concerned back when Mayor Mandami's election was taking place and then succeeded. And now that they're seeing the rise of the DSA and the rhetoric that they're using, the explicit references to things like democratic centralism that are unambiguously communist and so on, they're alarmed. So there's a wing within the Democratic, I don't want to say party necessarily. I don't know what's going on in the party. I'm not that connected with Democrats, but I do know that there are a lot of Democrat people, regular voters, and politically active people that are more than just everyday voters who are extremely alarmed about this. And they're finding, I know some of them reached out to me because they found my work exposing it helpful, which they could not allow themselves to do before, a year ago. So we're in a much better position than we were 5 or 6 years ago in terms of understanding. I don't think we're where we need to be. I don't think we're anywhere near the depth of sophistication and understanding that we need to be in order to fight it properly or to box it out properly. But we're doing a lot better than we were. So there are reasons for optimism. We're not out of the woods yet. It appears that they have kind of dropped, not completely dropped, that's not right. They have pulled back from the cultural revolution side of the issue and switched more to issues of material concern. The argument is the affordability issue, but I don't want to misrepresent that. I get taken advantage of a lot when I say things like that they're focusing on affordability, and they say, oh, well, if affordability is a socialist issue, that just shows how great socialism is. And it's like, no, affordability is the wedge that's the doorway they're coming through to bring a Marxist analysis of the affordability problems that they see. And if a set of, Marxist solutions like price controls, which are extremely popular right now on both sides, Republican and Democrat, especially among younger voters, rent control, all these weird activities Mondami's pulling, some of which are popular, some of which are not. So affordability is the doorway through which they are bringing a Marxist analysis of people's challenges. It's not to say affordability is their issue, but that's a nuanced point, I suppose. But your question was, are we in a better position? Yes, we're in a better position, but it's also not done. It's very dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. Great points. And you know how, as you and I know, when you look at things from a global perspective, you always have that intensification of the fanaticism where you always get one wave of these cult members essentially coming in who are more extreme than the last wave. It's a constant repeating pattern. And you mentioned the DSA. I was going to mention that because it's been mentioned to me by a few American patriot friends that you have this problem with the Democratic Socialists of America, and you know what they're all about, but they're starting to become more and more prominent. Is this a problem across American society in general, do you think, with different organizations and not just the Democratic Party, that we're seeing this kind of, more obvious and overt kind of infiltration, so to speak?
I think it's kind of happening on both sides of the political aisle, but, taking slightly different forms. But it's ultimately the same thing. This is one of the more controversial theses that I have, is that not only are woke left and woke right two strains of woke, I don't think they are separate movements. I actually think that they are primarily at the higher level a two-pronged movement that's got one set of plans. This is why we talk about horseshoe theory, about so much of their stuff overlapping, but it's not just horseshoe theory or some coincidence, or that they both veer toward totalitarian or authoritarian solutions to problems that they're trying to address. I think they're actually, when I say that the woke right is the right hand of the left, I actually mean that there's one big leftist project, and the woke right is part of the big leftist project. And, we're starting to see that there's a lot of scandal or speculation right now around JD Vance, as this video has gone around showing him talking about being skeptical of the value of America holding the global reserve currency. That's got a lot of people alarmed. I guess that video has close to 10 million views right now. A lot of important people are asking questions. I know I'm getting phone calls like, what in the heck is this? What is he talking about? But when you start to look at the kinds of things that he's talking about, like wondering if the global reserve currency status is a problem, focusing on GDP over more qualitative measures of life, a lot of the things, like I posted some excerpts from a speech that Obama gave in 2023, and a lot of the talking points are the same talking points. When you look at the things that, Tucker Carlson and some of the other guys are saying, a lot of the talking points and a lot of the destination points are the same destination points, with slightly different sets of parameters. You have a slightly different, moral ethical code, whether you care about trans people one way or really care about them the other way, that go into the formula, but the system works the same way. And I don't think that this is by mistake. I also don't think it's an accident that the timing of this rise on the right is so in parallel, like perfect parallel to the rise of the DSA. So the most objectionable thing that the Democrats could have lurched into at this moment is made to look, on the one hand, more palatable by the crazy stuff that's going on the right. And on the other hand, the thing on the right is echoing the identical talking points, which are going to funnel people into a emotionally charged state, an agitated state. And you have the DSA offering the apparent strongest solution while the Republicans are arguing about whether or not this is a socialist part. This is not a mistake. This is timed, coordinated operations to use both sides like a pair of scissors to cut us off of our liberty and to cut us off of the foundation of our country. So I think the infiltration is extraordinarily wide. I do not think it's just that we've been infiltrated through the Democrats or that the DSA is trying to have this takeover, which they are openly saying so. I think that the woke right has been an instrumental part. I think probably not just a few, but several, maybe many of the primary players or even the anonymous accounts online that nobody knows who they are actually either working for the Democrats outright, or foreign operatives outright that are all working on this. I do not think it's organic. I do not think it's coincidental. I do not think it's just like, oh, damn, what bad timing. Oh, no, it's bad timing that we blew up. Of course, we blew up at exactly the wrong moment because it was planned for us to blow up at exactly the wrong moment. So I think the infiltration is much further, wider, and deeper than people realize. And that's where I have more of the concern when, we're in a better position than we were in 2020, but we're not in a better position in the sense that a lot of conservatives seem to think that their side is somehow immune to this agitation. It's immune to entryism. It's immune to infiltration, subversion, agitprop. And I mean, all you have to do is spend about 5 minutes in the comment section on literally any social media. Instagram is a shithole. X is a disaster. YouTube comments, I think most of them are in Russian at this point. That's hyperbole. They're not. But like, for God's sake, anything that even comes close to touching a politically charged issue relevant to this stuff gets flooded with idiotic comments, with numbers of, people liking them or reposting that are just unrealistic. None of this feels like it's on the up and up. The timing, the coordination, the fact that you have this weird meshing, and it's all designed to cause Republicans to lose at the exact most crucial moment for them not to lose. This is just, I'm very convinced that this is operationally intentional, and that we are staring at it like thinking, no, that guy said he's a Christian. He couldn't possibly be lying to me because he said he's a Christian. And it's like, oh my God, are you fucking kidding me? Like, communists can pretend to be Christians, guys. They know how. It's easy, as a matter of fact.
Oh yeah, so many great points, of course, but that's one that I've been talking about in Ireland too, is it's not as simple as right and left wing anymore. And the communist camp in its entirety as a global cult are experts at infiltration, entryism, mingling in with people who call themselves patriots, conservatives, traditionalists, etc., and using the same talking points. And as you say, if someone comes along and says, I'm a Christian nationalist, to some people, they drop their guard. They immediately lose their discernment and stop really paying attention. And I mean, okay, I don't want to go on a rant here and knock you off track, but say if you look at, say, the infiltration of America, there's the labor union movements, the socialist groups, the education system, pre-20th century pretty much. But then you had the 1920s with the Comintern, which the Bolsheviks created pretty much. And that's why I've been saying, James, for ages, if people aren't going to learn, I think it was actually J. Edgar Hoover said this, the FBI chief said that. I can't remember the quote, but it was something like, Americans don't fully understand the evil that's in their midst, if they're not going to learn about all the methods of communist subversion and so on, it's going to be a big struggle, or something similar to that, pretty much.
Yeah, it's a hugely important point, and it's nice to bring up like J. Edgar Hoover, but like, let me bring something to the table that's a little bit more to the point and terrifying. In the 90s, there's a book published by a couple of colonels in the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, that's the CCP's military. So it's the military of the People's Republic of China. And that's a communist organization. And two colonels wrote a book about unrestricted warfare. That's actually the title as it got rendered into English. And they talk about three different types of warfare that are unconventional or unrestricted warfare. They don't involve guns. They don't involve rockets. They don't involve bombs or boats or planes or cutting internet cables or any of this even. And they name them their political warfare, public opinion warfare, which is also called media or narrative warfare. And then the third one is lawfare, using the legal system against a population, and that you can, without firing a shot, without alarming anybody to the fact that they're at war, use these three different strategies to undermine a target country rather thoroughly. And this is the point is that these colonels, whose names are Chinese, so I don't remember them. I don't have a great head for names in other languages usually. These two colonels wrote in their book in the late 90s that Americans' capacity to understand political warfare overall was so degraded that it may as well not exist, that we are simply sitting ducks for political warfare manipulation, for dialectical tricks, for all the different tactics that they use in the middle of taking control of and steering narratives off course. Political warfare also, by the way, it's not limited to public opinion or media or narrative. It can also take the form of buying farmland near a Air Force base, or just anywhere, or using Guam as a stronghold to create U.S. citizens that are never going to live in the United States, but are going to be trained by the PLA to be able to infiltrate later with the U.S. citizen status, things like President Trump is trying to fight. So political warfare is very broad, but their assessment is not just J. Edgar Hoover saying that if we don't learn about this, that we're ill-equipped for the evil that we're dealing with. The enemy itself, the People's Liberation Army of the People's Republic of China, said in the 90s that we are absolutely 100% completely vulnerable to this. The metaphor that I tend to give is it would be like if we were going to go storm at Normandy on Omaha Beach, and every one of us had to go running out of those landing craft in our bathing suits. No gun, no helmet, no jacket, nothing, no backpack, nothing. You're just wearing a pair of swimming trunks, and you've got to run off of that boat into machine gun fire. But the machine gun isn't shooting bullets now; it's shooting political warfare, narrative warfare, and legal warfare. And we've been sitting here taking this for decades. This also includes the gigantic amount of networks. Political warfare would include networks of funding nonprofits that shuttle money around. Neville Singham's group is a big one. When we talk about the DSA, everybody talks about Soros. Their objectives are somewhat different, but they tend to align in their attack on America under a principle of common enemy. And people just aren't ready for it. These networks of NGOs, massive amounts of money flooding in, making sure people get across the post in elections, making sure that they can take large numbers of DSA people, let's say in Los Angeles, where maybe nobody's up for an election, and move them to Michigan to make sure that those people have, a massive ground game in Michigan in order to get their one candidate there across the board or across the line and get elected. This is the kind of stuff that they're able to do, and that we just sit here basically, to put it in a correcting but colorful way, with our thumb up our ass, thinking everything's normal. We have no freaking idea that this is being waged intentionally against us, and because it doesn't cross any lines into illegal behavior or outright warfare, that we're basically defenseless. And the average citizen is completely defenseless. So they're not paying attention to the fact that their tweet blew up on X, and the reason that it blew up is because they tapped into a fruitful propaganda line for a hostile enemy that made sure its networks and bots blew up their tweets, so that it would create an encouragement. Nobody ever even knows. It creates the encouragement to push more messaging like that. Very subtle techniques. And we are almost completely blind to this, almost like we don't want to know. We just want to ignore the fact that we're on a battlefield that uses information as weapons and uses political tactics as weapons. And so that's really concerning. So, J. Edgar Hoover being concerned about it decades before, I should say, these colonels writing about this as a deliberate military strategy to take down the United States and executing on it, which taps straight into the same exact techniques that Alexander Dugin and his followers and supporters are using from the Russian angle, which is tied into the Iranian angle. These people are taking us down by propaganda, by manipulation of social media, by political warfare tactics, by public opinion. They're getting our young people to believe that Jews are the problem, that Israel's the problem, like just because why? Because it's so divisive. That's why. I haven't read it because it's only available to, as far as I can find it so far, in Russian and French, and I don't read either language. But Dugin wrote a book in '93 called Conspiriology, where he explains that a practical part of the explanation, it's actually explicitly an occult exploration of conspiracy theories, but he talks about in there that planting conspiracy theories in a enemy political environment as a form of information warfare is really fruitful if you have an irresolvable conspiracy theory. You can't decide one way or the other if it's true or false. That has a very divisive element to it, because what you'll end up doing is taking a population who will now argue over it, but they can't reach a resolution. There's no clear end. So there's just the people who believe it and the people who don't, and they fight with each other, and now they're not on the same team. And eventually, because of the nature of some of these things, they come to hate each other. And so this is a deliberate strategy that has been being deployed against us by our greatest enemies, what I call New Axis. And that New Axis is formally, at this time, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China, but that could easily expand. It might include some others. Those people know how to do this, and they also know that we're extremely vulnerable to it. And here we are, using X, doing our podcast, reading our analytics. I don't think I look at my analytics at all, but I don't know where they are. But I know on X, but I don't know on the other ones. But people are following this stuff, not having the slightest idea how manipulated they are, that they don't have to have a cent of money change hands to make them an effective asset of a foreign power. And believe me, the Democratic Party and the shady operators that are even in the Republican Party know how to do this too, and they do it because it's very politically effective. So we live, again, on the equivalent of Omaha Beach of information warfare, and we're like sitting there on our couch thinking everything's fine, and we just log in and participate like a bunch of morons. So that's really concerning. The thing we're not equipped for is the specific nature of the battlefield on which we are, and the fact that we're all combatants, even if we're sitting on our couch. It's kind of a funny side thing, and I'll give it back to you. I've talked to a lot of these different, white woke right guys at different points in the past, and they always are talking like big shits, like, oh yeah, they're going to civil war, and we're going to have a civil war, and it's going to be, we're going to put these guys down in civil war. And I'm like, I've asked like 5 of them to their face, are you going to fight in the civil war? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, what are you going to do? And they're like, I'm going to make memes to stoke the fighting and portray for the right side. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So they understand, though, something that a lot of people are missing. Like, we can make fun of it, and we should, because that's some seriously like loser ass behavior. But they understand that the primary nature of most wars now, even with all the weaponry that we have to deploy, is information war. They understand that the propaganda game is actually stronger. They understand that Hamas put up an incredible fight with their backers that one might even consider a near victory, or maybe even a victory against Israel, not through their attack, but through the propaganda, what I call Gaza Floyd, that they pulled afterwards. They convinced millions of people through the West that they're the victim when they're the ones who actually are literally terrorists who started the fight. And what they're doing. So I say a lot of times that the camera is actually one of the most deadly weapons of war right now, because any conflict that erupts anywhere, if you can get a camera on it, you can completely undermine and gut the population's will to fight in that war. Now, that might not matter in Russia, where Vladimir Putin makes a decision and that's what it is, but it matters a lot in the United States, where our media ecosystem can flare up about everything. And President Trump isn't just fighting Iran now or whatever else. President Trump is fighting Iran and having to deal with his own base turning on him as though he's some kind of a traitor constantly, and that is extraordinarily draining, demoralizing, and weakening. And this is the direct result of information warfare being launched by the exact enemies that we're attacking that have no particular material defenses against the things that we're doing. So it's like people have got to understand that we're in a completely different warfare space. And I'll tell you right now, everybody listening, if we are bombing a country, a lot of what you're reading about that country is fucking lies, because they want to lie to demoralize you so that you'll stop the bombing. This is propaganda 101. So, like, you might be reading stuff about Iran, or you might be reading stuff about whatever else, and a lot of it is lies designed to make you call your congressman and say, make President Trump stop this war. Why? Because they can't win it any other way except get people to bottom out on it. And this is the kind of stuff that the communists have been developing all the way through. The Soviets knew they were weaker. They knew that they had to do subversion, especially at the beginning. They had nothing. They had nothing in the early 1920s. They had to use subversion. They had agents. They didn't have weapons. They didn't have industrial capacity yet. They had agents, and they developed the most sophisticated propaganda techniques ever. And these techniques have been honed for the present moment and the present circumstances and the present environment. They were honed in the Middle East and imported through our universities, through things like post-colonial theory and all of these, Gaza protests in the contemporary age. And they were imported through our media. They were imported in every way that you can possibly imagine to make sure that America, with its powerful military, wouldn't be able to prosecute its wars when it actually needs to do so. And like I said, we're literally asleep at the wheel compared to the type of warfare that our enemies are launching against us, even though they're materially weaker than us in almost every possible respect.
On that topic of the American military, now I'll admit, right, being younger in Ireland, I was definitely contaminated with a lot of, communist, pro-communism thinking. I was raised with the idea, not intentionally by anyone, but just as part of the pop culture, that America was kind of a new type of imperialism. They were taking over the world. They were causing trouble in the Middle East and so on. And it wasn't until much later when I learned about communism, I said, hang on a moment, like since World War II, the US military was the main opponent to the spread of communism across the world. We had the Soviet Union, then Red China, but then you had, after 1949 and the PRC was formed, then you had the Korean War, 20 years of war across Asia, including the Vietnam War as well. So this is kind of like history repeating itself, but slightly in a different way. But as you said there, James, I'm sure because of all the demoralization and confusion and propaganda, is it a case that, like, how many, do Americans in general, from what you know, that sentiment that America still has a massive role on the world stage, is that still quite prominent, or is it being more eroded now by all this communist thinking?
I think people generally, I don't necessarily talk to a broad enough spectrum of people to know this for sure, but I think people generally understand that America has the by far largest role to play on the world stage. They understand that China is also large. I don't think that most of them understand that almost anybody else is all that large. Maybe the EU as a bloc, but the general perception that I have is that most Americans know that America is a gigantic force. What they are losing is the ability to believe that it's a force for good. In fact, they are being convinced by something that I have very uncreatively called critical America theory in a variety of forms, some of it left wing, some of it right wing, some of it libertarian. They've been convinced by various strains of critical America theory that actually America has been primarily a force for bad, especially since World War II or since the end of the 1960s, depending on how you want to time things. I have a sophisticated thing I want to argue at some point about the growth of neo-Marxism and mondialism through the 20th century and into the 21st in different stages, but I haven't done the homework to be able to lay it out properly yet, which is unfortunate because other people are, as you said before we started, about nature abhorring a vacuum. I'm seeing a lot of, for lack of a better term, retards filling that space with absolute retardation. Instead, they don't even know the fucking words that they need to know in order to talk about the issues, but they know everything. And getting it right takes time, which makes it harder to do. This is one of my greatest frustrations. You can hear by the dropping of the F word a few times there. getting it right takes more time than getting on a camera with a big red face and just blurting stuff out, as it turns out. But I digress. I think that this has eroded has been eroded, especially since the end of the 60s, is Americans' ability to believe that America is a force for good in the world. So, what they're starting to believe is that we're a big, giant, evil empire that needs to be restrained from what its ambitions are in the world, that it needs to retreat into itself and do less adventuring abroad. Now, I have to touch on the thing that I was saying to make any sense of that. We are all, I think, generally, very many people are not happy with what we should call Bush doctrine neoconservatism, if we want to use a very specific term that people understand the words for. But this is actually right wing mondialism, is the right word. Mondialism is this idea that we can basically create a single global order. A new world order, if you want, whatever, is a single global order that's going to operate under a single kind of set of global rules and politics, not one that's guaranteed necessarily by the hegemony backed by the force of the United States Navy or something like that, as we have had for a while, but one, in fact, where we're going to go around like Bush wanted to do, or the Bushes wanted to do, and democracy build. So we're going to go into Iraq or Syria or whatever, and we're just going to blow them up until they're democracies. We'll just beat their asses and occupy their places until they figure out how to run a republic. And it turns out that doesn't work. I don't know if there is any good reason to believe that it would ever, but it doesn't. And the theory has been busted. In fact, President Trump's election, in fact, President Obama's election, even though he's a left-wing mondialist and neo-Marxist, it was an absolute repudiation of that. Of course, I get a lot of shit. James, you voted for Obama twice and then Hillary, so you're not a real conservative, so you can't talk to us. Well, you know why? Because I'm against the same fucking thing you are, you assholes. I'm against George W. Bush doctrine, democracy building, or right-wing neo-mondialism. I am against the same thing. I didn't know what to do about it because I was politically ignorant and voted for Democrats, where you guys, I don't know what you did in the meantime. I think actually most of them were 12 and didn't do a damn thing because they were 12. So excuse me on that. But the fact of the matter is that that doctrine is busted now. We understand that we can't go democracy build through the right wing Bush doctrine, bomb them into submission, and then occupy until we rebuild model. We also can't go democracy build in the way that the EU and Obama and Hillary Clinton would have wanted to do had she been president, which is to just kind of do this weird diplomacy strangulation policy until they kind of cave in and play by our rules as sort of vassal states or whatever, while destabilizing a bunch of stuff so that we have the excuse to keep doing it and then to use military force where they want to in order to push that agenda, with the complication that the left-wing side got consumed by neo-Marxism all along. Which is how we actually went woke, by the way. That's actually how we went woke. All your other theories about how we went woke are wrong. That's how we went woke. But I'm against all of that. Trump is against all of that. Trump's trying to execute against all of that. And what he has now is this weird right wing that has decided that it's so mad about the thing he's fighting that they're mad at him. For no apparent reason, except that they don't understand what they're doing. They've been propagandized. But they have come to believe that America is still that force for bad in the world that's going and trying to democracy build, that's trying to force other countries to play by America's rules, that is trying to do economic imperialism, or just make a quick, quote unquote, neoliberal buck by selling everything out and selling out our corporations and our workers and so on. And it's just a really poor understanding of what's going on, but they're, I guess, right to be mad. But the fact is that they think America has become a force for bad in the world, and therefore, as they always say, you know, the purpose of a system is what it did, or if the principle that you held to got you to this point, what use was the principle? They say these stupid things, these kind of thought terminating cliches, sort of, to justify the fact that that means what we need to do is upend the entire apple cart and do something completely different. And that they agree with on left and right. The left wants to upend the apple cart for something that's socially liberal socialism, and the right wants to upend it for something that's more like socially conservative socialism. They get really rankled when they call it socialism, so you have to call it something like integralism or something to make them happy. But it's effectively the same thing. The state is going to have powers of distribution and redistribution, and they're going to nationalize industries and so on. You see a lot of sophisticated arguments for hiding this ball, but it's ultimately all the same stuff. But what's really going on is they've been convinced, mostly since the end of the 1960s, not since the end of World War II, since the end of the 1960s, to believe that America is a force for bad in the world. The left did this through the neo-Marxism, through Soviet infiltration, Soviet lines. They came in a lot through third worldist, what a post-colonial theory, and the right has done so much more recently, largely off of the back of the failures of Bush doctrine neoconservatives and the so-called Rhino Republicans, who are, by the way, the same thing, right-wing mondialists. That's why they get along with the left-wing mondialists, because they have an underlying philosophy, meta-philosophy in common, which is mondialism, which is a busted theory that we should all get away from. Again, it means one worldism, one world government, one world program, at least, if not government, one world program that we're all going to be on. And this isn't going to work. And so they're answering this with America's a force for bad in the world, so America needs to shrink back. We need a multipolar world where the different powers are balanced. That way America can't just be too far out on a limb doing whatever it wants. If America has to take seriously another global scale superpower, whether that's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's a caliphate, so that there are 3 or 4 or 5 of these major world powers occupying great spaces of the world, not necessarily just national arenas, then America is going to have to basically humble itself and stop with all that crap. This is literally the philosophy of the less ridiculous woke right, with a fair steelman to it. And it's just the bad reaction to a failed doctrine that Trump already repudiated and already moved away from. Although I don't think that Trump understands this beyond the intuitive and just is tackling things pragmatically, which is frustrating at certain times. I agree. But I digress. Yes, America's a big player on the stage, but people have been convinced through a critical America theory of various forms that doesn't understand the real trouble or is hiding the real trouble, that America is a force for bad in the world and therefore has to be reduced in its scope to do that bad in the world. And they have a variety of theories for why America's bad. We're not equitable enough for the left. We don't have a diversity, inclusion, sustainability, degrowth, whatever, resilience. And on the right, it's that we've abandoned Christian morals, so we need the state to assume the powers to force people back into at least pretending they have Christian morals, which is all they'll do if they're forced, is pretend. But they have different theories about why we've rotted out, but they ultimately think that we've rotted out and we act badly, so we have to be shrunken back and isolated, and not be the force that we have been because we misused our privilege and our power, et cetera, et cetera.
Great stuff, James. And I suppose you hinted at this thing of a communist alliance. We could call it new, but it's not really new, because we look at the DNA of Russia when it was the Soviet Union after the Bolsheviks took over, and then Red China, of course, with Mao, and then North Korea. They're kind of working together again. They're military allies and everything else, plus they've got other allies as well, including Iran and other nations. And it's amazing that people can't see this, and it's the timing of it, James. How it can't be a coincidence that after decades of what people call woke and cultural Marxism and everything else, eroding the patriotism, opening the borders, causing division, breaking down the family unit, etc., all that stuff. While all this weakening is going on, now we have this military alliance on the horizon with communism on the DNA, and all these bad actors, they have been, trying to weaken the West over the decades. The timing of all this can't be a coincidence.
Yeah, I don't know how anybody can think it's a coincidence. Actually, there's the weirder part to it, which is the year 2030 is creeping up. You've probably heard there was an Agenda 2030. There were a lot of things to do with 2030. There's even some guy that renamed himself FM 2030 a number of years ago. Like 2030 is supposed to be the big year. A lot of the mondialists that I was referencing before, these kind of one world people, believed that part of the program was going to be to hand the reins of global hegemony to Asia, meaning Beijing, as we go into the 21st century. So, the Dutch had a century, the British had a century, the Americans had I think the Spanish had a century before the Dutch. I might have those in the wrong order. The British had a century, the 19th, the Americans had a century in the 20th, and now it's going to hand off. in the long 20th century, and now it's going to, as they call it, and now it's going to hand off to a century of Asia. And a lot of things that were architected in the late 60s through the early 2000s were designed to create that in China and to hand off that power base on the fundamentally broken assumption that, basically all cultures operate in fundamentally the same way, and that China is not really, really communist anymore now that Mao died, and they had to be more pragmatic about it under Deng Xiaoping. And so I guess it'll be fine. So this program has also, it's not a coincidence in that it's all happening kind of at once under, as Dugin's been writing about since the 90s, the principle of common enemy between these groups that I would call New Axis. But it's also that 2030 is some kind of like eschatologically significant year in global politics for a lot of these people, and they're trying to force all this crap to happen in or around that year. And a lot of people don't take that seriously either. Some of the people that are funding a lot of this are weird eschatologists themselves. They believe like weird end times prophecies, like they've got to do all this weird crap so that Jesus will come back and take them. And like, I don't know what that's supposed to help, but like, dude, we got enough going on here. We don't need this crap too. Can we just deal with like a communist takeover instead of that too? But this is the ingredients. So this is this huge push. We're in the middle of it. It's super crazy and weird. But no, it's not a coincidence. And some of it though is also understanding once 2016 rolled around and President Trump actually broke the mondialist order. So all of a sudden you have MAGA, which is not ideologically mondialist. You can argue as much as you want about whether or not Trump is ideological or just pragmatic. What he is not is a mondialist. And what he is definitely disrupting is the global mondialist project that a lot of the big players have had for decades, that have dumped trillions of dollars into for decades to try to build out. You could argue through almost the entirety of the 20th century, but I would argue, or maybe before that, but I would definitely say that in the last 50 years, there was a dedicated project to build a particular new world order based on the mondialist hypotheses, and Trump all of a sudden busted that. So all of a sudden, if we have 2030 as a bookmark year and it's 2016 and President Trump got elected in November at the end of that year, you've got about 13 years in which you've got to figure out how to take the biggest player on the board not playing along anymore and still accomplish your goals. And this has forced them to move. In this term, Trump whacking Maduro in Venezuela, Trump moving on Iran, whether he was forced to because of the development of the nuclear program or for other reasons, for other strategic purposes, is a question that probably gets answered in skiffs that I don't have access to. But the point is that he's disrupting all of the fundamental building blocks of that program very systematically. And as I was saying before, the response is not only for them to coordinate against him, including the EU and Canada, who have been fully mondialized and are effectively siding with New Axis, especially Canada is openly siding with China against the United States, elbows up and bent over. They're doing this because Trump is now systematically dismantling their glorious century-long vision to transfer the basis of power on the planet. And TikTok, for their weird other theories and other things, time is running out. So they've got to throw everything plus the kitchen sink at him in order to try to get in his way. So yeah, it's very, very coordinated right now because they all understand the point, and most Americans may not understand the point, but all these guys, I guarantee you, understand the point because most of them have invested most of their life's work and tons and tons and tons and tons of money into it. And here it is at risk because of effectively, ragtag rabble movement of MAGA patriots that they love to sneer at and make fun of, and then their weird golden-haired, foul-mouthed, bizarre president who isn't playing on that playbook or following that script, and therefore threatens the entire delicate operation and maybe its special coronation dates.
Ladies and gents, please do repost or quote repost the space. I'm in conversation here with James Lindsay. You mentioned Canada, so many great stuff of things you mentioned, of course, but about Canada, I mean, nothing should really shock us. And I knew years ago, around say 17, 18, that Canada was pretty much gone, unfortunately. And I had a little theory that, countries that are quite like Australia as well, I lived there for years, that countries that are quite passive and not politically engaged enough, not patriotic enough, they tend to be, prone to this kind of a takeover, and now it's gotten so bad. And it shouldn't surprise people that, I mean, after decades of the liberals, quote unquote, controlling the country, that now they've fallen into the control of the clutches of the CCP more and more, the Belt and Road Initiative or economic means. Nothing should really shock us, and it was kind of predictable. And now Canada is pretty much a security threat to the United States. So I mean, geographically you're in a good spot with the oceans on both sides, but you've got that massive land border with Canada, which is not far from Russia. I mean, what's the sentiment on that one? Is it connected to what we said earlier? People brainwashed in the States will insist that you shouldn't get involved in Canadian affairs, but they're a sovereign nation, etc. But yet if they fall into the grip of the CCP, they become a security threat. So I mean, how do you square that circle?
I think a lot about Canada in those capacities. I mean, we have a 5,500-mile unsecured border with Canada, and it's made a pretty explicit alliance with China now, which is not exactly our buddy. It's a very dangerous thing. It's already, by the way, a security threat. The things that Trump said that pissed the Canadians off so much that they voted for Mark Carney, that, there's a massive, drug trafficking problem across the border and some other things. Those things were all true. They were all verifiably true. But Mark Carney was able to leverage the worst case of Trump derangement syndrome possibly on the planet, plus this weird Canadian cultural vibe, which is, at least we're not American. Like, there's this weird inferiority complex a lot of Canadians carry, and they assuage their sense of self by, at least we're not Americans. And so somehow Carney was able to, while, as it appears, planning to sell their country piece by piece, Carney was able to leverage those two sentiments to have one of the greatest reversals in political fortunes that probably has ever happened in their previous election, defeating the runaway favorite, Pierre Poilievre, who, had he faced off against Justin Trudeau, would have probably obliterated him. But it's a very serious threat. I try to tell people this a lot. I don't get a strong, like, America first, like, drop it vibe when I talk about Canada. So I'm guessing that Americans aren't quite as, like, hopped up about it. No Jews, no news. It turns out Canada's not Israel, so they don't flip their shit about it when you try to talk about it being a relevant topic. But the Canadian issue is actually pretty serious. I think it's a matter of Americans, for the same reason, ultimately, on the other side of the coin, that a lot of Canadians have this view that is like, oh, at least we're not Americans. A lot of Americans have the view like, oh, it's just Canada. Like, we just kind of don't think about it or don't care. But with them making an alliance with the CCP, with them allowing Chinese troops, in fact, in police in Canada, it's a real risk. And like I said, that border is already a security risk. It's already got things happening across it that are big, huge problems, and it's virtually unsecurable. So, we should really be taking the affairs of Canada more seriously. Again, not in a Bush doctrine kind of way that we're going to go in and, like, liberate Ottawa or whatever, but in a way like that we're, like, President Trump and his team have a lot of tools at their disposal. They could be putting a lot of pressure on Canada about certain things that do present real threats to the United States. The American citizenry could be raising this alarm a little bit more seriously and paying attention to the threats that it's not just our southern border that presents threats. Our northern border presents a whole different set of threats. And the last thing anybody should want is for that 5,500-mile border to become a hostile border, a problem border, one where we, maybe even have to worry about, serious police or border police, or military presence to protect American interests. And I can promise you that Canadians don't want that situation either. I do sort of wish, although I found out there's a historical precedent for it that I find amusing, I do wish we'd kind of shut up about this 51st state thing. It irritates the Canadians in a way that I know that a lot of American, especially right wingers, love to. They love to troll them. They love to make them mad just to make them mad. But it's like, this is actually the primary fuel taking their idiot selves to push them into a position that's really bad for us. So, like, maybe don't play in the dialectic. Also, it's bullshit. Nobody wants Canada to be the 51st state if they think about it for more than 5 minutes. You're talking about 44 million people that live there that are to the left of California. The fuck are you talking about? We don't want that. How are we going to beat that in elections? Like, we do not need to import 44 million total libtards. I know some of them aren't, but my God, these people are broken. I don't know if you've talked to someone, they're broken. Like, no 51st state. And the historical parallel I learned was actually during the earliest part of the Revolutionary War, or the War for Independence, depending on how you want to phrase that. General Washington sent Benedict Arnold, before he turned traitor, up through Maine to try to get to Montreal to convince the French Canadians to join the American cause as the 14th colony, in order to shut off a northerly route for the British to be able to control waterways through the St. Lawrence Seaway and downward through the Finger Lake region. And so, and Lake Champlain and all that. So there was an attempt to make Canada the 14th colony, and it failed, mostly because of winter, as it turns out. And it was very important in the history of religious liberty in the Americans' view, because they didn't want those damn French Catholics. But then they needed them to be on our side, so we're going to have religious liberty for Catholics all of a sudden, which before that probably wasn't the case. And here we are talking about 51st state, but like, we don't want that, actually. So that's not a viable solution to the problem. A more viable solution would be to do things on both sides of the border that encourage a healthy Canadian renewal. Hopefully that Canada steps away from its current charter system and moves into a genuine constitution. They do have the bulk of the cultural prerequisites necessary to be a proper liberal republic and survive. So, they could adopt a very American style constitution and succeed, unlike, say, Liberia, which has a carbon copy and couldn't do it, because they do have the cultural prerequisites in many regards, not quite all of them, but in many regards, so they could make it happen. I think we should encourage that, and we should not play in the dialectic, and we should take very seriously that a national security threat as the Canadian border is a serious national security threat that we shouldn't be so glib about. We should actually take that issue really seriously. And I wish the Trump administration would do more. I understand it's a delicate situation because the Trump derangement syndrome basically has them grabbed by the balls, pulled down to their knees so they can't do anything if Trump is involved at all, except go against him, friend-enemy distinction style, like a bunch of robots. But I do wish that they would exercise what powers they have to try to create the pressures to try to bend Canada away from some of its worst excesses and mistakes that threaten us.
And staying with the geopolitical stuff, obviously the Iran war and that conflict in the Middle East is kind of a hot topic. And, to give some of you guys, my American friends, insights into some of the Irish discourse, Ireland isn't exactly like Canada, but there are elements of that going on. The indoctrination distorts people's perceptions of reality. And obviously a lot of people in Ireland were raised with the sentiment that America was the American empire, they're trying to take over the world and all this stuff. And when it comes to the Iran conflict, I was trying to explain to people, and this should be so obvious, that Iran is clearly got an alliance with the communist alliance we spoke about of Russia, China, etc. There's clearly a connection there. And the Middle East is an important battleground for sure. And obviously it ties into the Israel-Palestine conflict. I'm sure you guys noticed as well that one of the things I heard, which actually made me laugh, was that they were referring to the US and Israel alliance as being like the Epstein alliance. So they were trying to associate the Western powers essentially with degeneracy and paedophilia and so on and so forth. And I heard this being repeated in the discourse, which isn't normal. To me, it kind of sounded like commie propaganda. Did you notice any of this kind of in the discourse, James, at all? This kind of like it deliberately tainting the image of the Western forces, essentially.
I mean, yeah, obviously, and there's a reason for this, and it is effectively that whatever the status, I mean, it's fair to say that we could have a good allyship with Britain or France or whatever European country or Canada or the Five Eyes or whatever. So maybe saying that Israel is America's greatest ally is or is not fair, and whatever you mean by greatest. But it's certainly, I think, at this juncture, in terms of fighting global threats, geopolitical concerns, and communism, it's probably the most important allyship we have by a long way. Actually, a very long way. I think it's actually the crucial link in the chain to fighting communism. And if you actually know the history of how even the Palestinian conflict, the relevance of Iran to a lot of this came into being, is it actually follows. Everybody knows about the 6-Day War, even though these days, but even though if they don't know about the 6-Day War, this was in 1967. You can guess how long it lasted. Hint, 6 days. The short version of this is that Egypt had crossed some red lines and Israel decided for its own security it needed to preemptively make sure that nothing happened. So they were the ones who struck first, but it was in response to an imminent threat. They were able to subdue and defeat Egypt within 6 days. But in the crossfire, and this is why people know about it, on June 8th, 1967, a U.S. spy ship called the USS Liberty got attacked by Israeli forces that thought it was Egyptian, until they figured out that it wasn't and stopped the attack, apologized, paid reparations, and so on. And this was such a traumatizing thing that this awful Middle Eastern country, Israel, would attack the American boat. To the Americans were so offended that they allied with Israel explicitly soon after. So the relevance is, after the 6-Day War, the United States finally began its formal alliance with Israel, which, P.S., USS Liberty propaganda idiots, the United States and Israel were not allies when the USS Liberty thing happened. That was right afterwards. And so it wasn't an ally attacking an ally at the time to begin with. But I digress. Once the United States and Israel formed their official alliance in 1967, later that summer, the Soviet Union realized it wasn't going to get Israel on its side. The biggest concern, which you can learn by reading Alexander Dugin's analysis of this, and he's a very relevant character, the biggest concern for the Soviets was control of the rimland. As it turns out, they are generally landlocked. Yeah, they have some very rough water and very northern ports. Some of them are not quite as bad in the Far East, but they're hemmed in by Japan, and that's still rough water, cold water. If you want nice warm water ports and all the things that you can do with that, you need access to southern rimland. You also need access to things like the how do I put it? It's like a geopolitical like crossroads or something. It's like the most important geopolitical crossroads on the planet is a little country. It's not that little, called Iran. Iran is located at the only useful portage between the Middle East and Asia and India and Europe and Africa. If you want to go in between those places, you have to go through Iran, or you have to go around the Arabian Peninsula where you're still dealing with Iran, or you're using the if you're trying to do a land-sea combination route, you're having to use the infamous Strait of Hormuz. It turns out this is all super important land. And the Soviets understood this. So once the United States allied with Israel in 1967, they were in a big problem, because now it wasn't so much they'd kind of got chased British control out of the region, or British control had given up on the region, and now you have one of the major Atlantic, as they see it, Western powers connected directly into the region. So Iran can't act with impunity, or in alliance with any Russian interests, if wherever those go. Obviously in 1979 that took the turn that we all are aware of, and the 12er regime took over. It was a contentious region. They generate the entirety of the so-called Palestinian conflict as we understand it today. Obviously it preceded 1967, but the idea of a permanent resistance to Zionist occupation that both woke right and left have taken up massively here in the West, throughout the West today, began in roughly 67 as the Soviets' new plan to stop U.S. interests from allying successfully with Israel and being able to have any presence and control in the region. So this is all like super derivative Soviet, and it's all extremely important for the geopolitical interests today of Russia and of China. China's Belt and Road Initiative, its new Silk Road, its 2 maritime routes, and its 1 land route all depend on Iran being in friendly control. If President Trump were to disrupt that, it would be a completely different story on the global stage. Bigly, as he would say, or big league, actually, is what he says. And Russia understands also that it is going to limit itself to effectively being a regional power and not a giant, powerful land-based empire if it can't keep control of that Middle Eastern, as it calls it, rimland. So this is an extraordinarily complicated area geopolitically. Whatever's happening in the region itself is backed by the most enormous forces on the planet, and that's part of why it's such a mess. That's why the fighting is so intense and so prolonged. I don't know if President Trump's timing for prosecuting this war starting last summer, last June, with Operation Midnight Hammer, and then following up starting at the end of February this year. I don't know if it's the right timing. I get the impression from the publicly made statements. I don't have secret intelligence here, guys. P.S. I'm cut out. Like I figure this out by reading the tea leaves on the internet like you do, and actually reading books that people talk about things and their strategies and philosophies. But I think he was pushed into it. I think it was a matter of the intelligence saying that it was an imminent threat that had to be dealt with right now. And once that happened, it happened. And now we are where we are. And I don't think it was in his best interest to do it in the, spring of the midterm year, politically speaking, but his concern wasn't political. It was something bigger than that. Trump has actually said that, by the way. So anyway, the whole region is absolutely crucial to fighting global communism and the global communist and mondialist programs to create this different world order, whether it's multipolar, whether it's China-led, whether it's just some kind of fragmented thing where America has gone very protectionist and isolationist. This new global order that is on the table is going to have a strong communist bent to it, and the U.S.-Israel alliance is the most important link in the chain that is protecting the world from that fate. Absolutely. And that's why you see so many resources being dumped into propaganda, into the wars themselves, the actual combat, and so much actually delicate activity with the approach to prosecuting those wars in the region. Everything's super weird because literally the fate of the global order for the next century to century and a half might be on the table over this. And like I said, the key of that entire project is the U.S.-Israel alliance, which needs to be kept at least practically strong, whatever American citizens think about things, as long as that can last, maybe notwithstanding. And that's why they're all mad about this provision in the new NDAA, the Defense Authorization Act, is because it's going to protect and formalize that relationship, that alliance with Israel in a different way that makes it less, as the woke writer right, it makes it less subject to political winds and therefore more likely to be able to last. But bottom line, if you care about stopping the march of communism and related forces in the world, you probably should be supporting the U.S.-Israel alliance, because at this point, especially with Europe, having done what it's done to itself, it's pretty much all we got in order to stop the last calamity. So I think it's actually that important.
Good stuff. Brilliant analysis, James. And before I go to you, Stealth, just ask, ladies and gents, please do retweet the space. And just to add a little bit more, one of the things that opened my eyes to what was happening in the Middle East, despite my kind of biases from years ago, was, how people on the political right, they're starting to become aware of this as an Islamo-communist kind of alliance, the marriage of a communist revolution and Islamic fundamentalism going back in history, and clearly that's a factor in the Middle East, and so that's a problem anyway. But on top of that, like you say, I think it was the idea of, I think it was Operation S.I.G. I think it was Zionistskie Gosudārstva, Zionist governments, the KGB kind of operation or influence op to convince people that the Israel was the oppressor in the Middle East, which is very important because like we know, anyone who analyzes communism over the history, when you place somebody in the oppressor class, you generate hatred for them and they become a target. And you can see that in the Middle East and how they've kind of flipped it. And I totally agree with what you said, James, that people, because their biases, even in Ireland, they can't accept what you said. They would never give any sort of support to Israel because of their biases or the American-Israel alliance, even though it's in their interests to do so in terms of saving Western civilization. But I know you probably want to jump in there, James, but maybe we should let Stealth jump in here first. Go ahead, Stealth.
Before we jump off, something to ask James. So there was a brief period in Irish history where they were pro-Israel when the Israelis kicked out the British because they were providing arms and support to the Arabs, and also stopping Jews from being able to evacuate Europe and from some of the Middle East countries into Israel. They were limiting immigration into Israel. Have you ever analyzed that short time period? And then there's a great podcast, with Spiked, and I think, what's the guy's name? I can't remember his name. And I covered it 2 years ago, where, the new religion in Ireland, well, he says Israelophobia, I call it Palestinianism, where they replaced statues of the Virgin Mary across the countryside with Palestinian flags, and became Mariologists. They left Mariology and they became, their religion, their state religion currently to this day is Palestinianism. Do you talk about post-Catholic countries, quick slide into like a Palestinian ideology, so to speak, that they've adopted that as their religion in Europe? Have you looked at that yet, James? Thanks.
I have not looked at that. No, I mean, it's an interesting hypothesis. Certainly, there are these historical facts. It's always kind of funny when you see things like, all of a sudden Ireland is supportive of Israel because they basically stuck it to the British, and their real issue is that they're mad at the British. For me, it's really ironic because they have accepted, it's like they've just spent however many centuries basically resisting colonization, and then just decided to open the door to a different colonization kind of immediately. From the Middle East and North Africa. But I have not studied this. I will say, I was going to say something. One interesting thing that you made me think of, but I forgot what it is. I'll say something that Emmett brought up, though, is that when you said when you declare them the oppressor, it generates all the hate. This is the kind of key that everybody has to understand as part of being woke at a fundamental level, or being a communist if you want, or a fascist if you want, is this operation on what's known as the friend-enemy distinction in politics, as it was named by Carl Schmitt in the 1920s and then 1930s. Developing that theory. And this idea is that there is some declaration of the enemy that is made by somebody outside of you that is considered sovereign or powerful. So it's going to be like the party in action, or the Communist Party, or the Politburo, or just the theory, or whatever, in a kind of Western disaggregated sense, that has named, in communism, that has named something the oppressor. With fascist kind of ideologies, it's some outsider that has been named a contaminant, or it might be a sovereign dictator themselves that names a particular enemy, which can be a specific guy, like Mao naming Liu Shaoqi the enemy, which he did in 1962 or 3, certainly in 66, very explicitly, had him deposed by 67. Or it could be something more vague, like Mao naming the revisionists. So everybody who qualifies as a revisionist under whatever is the enemy. So it could be a dictator. It could also be, like you said, though, the theory. Once something under communism has been named the oppressor, the friend-enemy distinction logic kicks in. And the friend-enemy distinction logic is, we fight the enemy. We're the friends who fight the enemy. And if somebody else won't fight the enemy with you, they are also the enemy. And the key part of that isn't just that everybody has to fight the enemy or else they're also the enemy too. It's this kind of weird tribal warfare logic. It's also that, again, you don't get to, there's no negotiation on the definitions. If the Politburo or the Party Congress or whatever, if the Third International at the time were to declare Zionists as the enemy, everybody who's aligned with communists has to act in a centralized way against the enemy, which at that point would be Zionism. And so that logic permeates communism, it permeates fascism, it permeates lots of brutal collectivist ideologies. And that's kind of actually brought me back to the thing I forgot to say a minute ago, Stealth, which is that I like how you drew out, I don't have anything interesting to say about the question you asked, but I do like how you drew out the difference between this kind of anti-Israel and this Palestinianism, because this is actually a clear dividing line between woke left and woke right on the issue. The woke right is anti-Israel and the woke left is Palestinianist. They have taken up a religion in practice. When the bullet comes out of the gun, they do the same thing. But the
approach is different.
Yeah, that's right. And the mental architecture behind it is different. So the leftists think they're supporting some poor, oppressed Palestinian people, whereas the right believes that you have a contaminating element that's Israel and Jews that has to be eliminated from the story, and then there can be peace. But again, like once the approach, the logic, the arguments are different. You will not find a lot of leftists. You'll find some leftists, but not a lot of leftists coming out directly and saying, for instance, that they have a problem with Jews. You'll find a lot on the right who will come out and say directly that they have a problem with Jews, because they have the logic is going at the same target from two opposite directions, or from two, I guess, orthogonal directions. They make like a 90-degree angle to hit the same place. But when the bullet comes out of the gun, it's still shot at the same people and they're wearing yarmulkes. And so it's literally just the logic works out the same way. So this comes back to that point that I raised earlier, which is that you almost always see this weird scissor thing where the left and the right are doing something different at angles to one another, that if you were to get between the blades, it cuts at the exact same spot. And in fact, the two working together cut more effectively than either blade on their own, which suggests that it's kind of a planned, coordinated project. This is why I say again and again and again on X, I haven't said it in a while, I need to go say it here later today then, is that if you suddenly, if you're especially a conservative who suddenly in the last 4 to 5 years, 3 years in particular, decided that Israel is the problem, you are a useful idiot for a communist plot or an Islamo-Marxist plot. And I said this a million times too, just so everybody knows, the logic behind the Red-Green Alliance and the logic behind Queers for Palestine is located on the last page of the Communist Manifesto, written in 1848, where it says that the communists always and everywhere will take the side of any group or organization or movement that is against the current order of things. Dugin writes about this explicitly and extensively, talking in particular about using the Shia Muslims as allies to the Russians, besides his weird traditionalist reasons for doing so, under what he calls again and again and again, like hundreds of times. If you go get a copy of Foundations of Geopolitics, at least the translation I have, and you type in the phrase principle of common enemy, principle of common enemy probably appears 300 times in that book. It is maybe not that many, maybe 100. It's a lot of times that he says this is how it works. And so it's the same logic. It's the friend enemy distinction. If you guys fight, we can fight our common enemy together, and sort it out later, like they did in Iran in 1979, which was not directly, there's my conspiracy theory for the moment, directly controlled by communists, but was rather controlled by the clerics, the Shia clerics, who have been such a great contribution, sarcasm thick on that, great contribution to world history. So anyway, there are things to say, but I don't know anything about post-Catholic countries. Let's just hope Poland doesn't fall that way, because it seems to be doing okay.
Can I add one dimension? So this distinction between Israelophobia and the Palestinianism. There's another dynamic that I would love you to comment on is the Nazi Bolshevik movement under Dugin, where he was able to create what we see now is very much being exported from his operations is this Atomwaffen situation on the right, leading to accelerationism and a new um, mostly it's like this O9A stuff. I hate talking about it because it gets so dangerous, but the recruitment from the left in terms of assassination culture has been something that we understand and are more aware of. On the right, the recruitment by foreign nationals through online Discord and channels using, and we had this at after Charlottesville was the Tree of Life, where you had individuals directly associated with the Unite the Right movement at Charlottesville that were in group chats with individuals, sadly, of which, you know, group chats with Bowers, who did the attack on the synagogue, but the two young men were affiliated with Richard Spencer, Jack Posobiec. They were all in group chats with Torba. There's a whole phenomenon on the right that nobody talks about. And when we are seeing these sudden pop up of what appears to be as if it's right wing terrorism or left wing terrorism, often you'll see like Christchurch, or you'll see like the phenomenon down in San Diego, or Nikita Caspa, or a handful of other like these Turtle Island people, or these two young guys from Texas that were going to invade an island off of Haiti. Um, and I can give you more details on that. I talk about it extensively. I don't want to take too much time on the podcast, but this is something important from the right that is we're really struggling to understand. Um, when that sophisticated, it goes all the way back to Timothy McVeigh and Aryan Nation stuff, but like the funding of people like David Duke and him living in Russia for 5 years. And then suddenly that absorption directly into the vein of a 2015, 2016 movement led what seemed to be by young children, but were being operated at a much more sophisticated level and having relationships with Eastern Bloc actors, some of which were living in England. But it's this very weird thing of when the fall of the Soviet Union, what came out of that. And obviously because of the Russia-Ukraine war, there was a kickoff that was initial 2014, and then 2022 and October 7th led to this kind of ramping up of what we're seeing. That's how coordinated it is. Do you ever talk about those phenomenons? Because that's a really hard thing for us to grapple with, that Dugin ascribed to this Nazi Bolshevik movement.
I mean, I talk a little bit about Dugin's philosophy in terms of his Nat Bol, his National Bolshevism or Nazi Bolshevism approach. He's written that weird essay, Fascism, Borderless and Red. I did a podcast reading the entire thing. And he dips in on this in Fourth Political Theory, although that's a challenging book. I mean, you got to have some basis in traditionalism and in Heidegger, which nobody knows what Heidegger's talking about anyway, to really kind of understand what he's talking about. I do talk about the accelerationist part, and I do have a lot of concerns about the recruitment through Discord and Telegram chat groups to try to basically sow these ideologies in people and then take advantage of them later. The accelerationist game is probably one of the most important dynamics. It's not like straight up skullduggery for people to understand, which is that. And this is explicitly, by the way, the strategy that Nick Fuentes runs from his Groypers. The strategy is that each side will accelerate the situation to actually, in the short term, give the other side the advantage. So the idea would be that you accelerate what's called right accelerationism, is that you accelerate the powers on the left. You empower leftism. This is when they're out there saying vote Democrat, vote Democrat, vote Democrat, because they want 4 awful years during which they can recruit. So that the idea is accelerate left, rebound right. So the idea is that if you know the pendulum's going to swing or the ball is going to bounce back, so you want to throw it as hard as you can in the opposite direction, make it bounce really hard so that you can get a more radical person. Now the left is doing the same thing. Left accelerationism is to encourage radicalists on the right to go out and do. Usually they're not trying to get these guys into power. They're trying to get them to do some asinine thing like showing up outside of a mosque and acting the fool so they can create, or showing up outside of an anti-ICE rally and acting like assholes so that they can make shows or make clips or cause like literally a fight or a conflict or a battle that then discredits law enforcement. But the
I mean,
idea is there.
Charlottesville was their perfect combination of this. That's the first
That's
time
right.
I've ever seen something so well orchestrated and funded and so
That's right.
effective at destroying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was like, yeah, that's the strategy, not in a political sense, but in a microcosm where you literally had a lurch left, a hard lurch right, a harder lurch left, boing, boing, boing. And remember, that's specifically what Joe Biden said was the reason he was running for president, even though it was 100% bullshit. So it was all a setup to do the entire justification there. And then to have that boiling over energy and angst and anger that characterized J6, which they milked to the end of the earth. So this idea that they're going to think of it like a ping pong match or whatever, where each side is going to hit the ball the other way as hard as it can because they know it's going to come back even harder. And the goal is to get the ball to bounce hard enough eventually to where it escapes. Escapes what? The constitutional order. So it doesn't really matter if it's a left-wing communist style dictator who takes over and overthrows the Constitution, or a right-wing fascist style dictator who ends up overthrowing the Constitution. The point is to get the Constitution out of the way, to get the American experiment out of the way. The left knows that so the left and the right have very different perspectives on this. The right is frankly the retard of the pair, and they think they're going to take power and they're going to like rule with an iron fist and fix all the problems. And historically, they don't manage to make it very many years, and the communists take back over. And the communists are perfectly willing to wait, whether it's 12 years power for Hitler or whether it was like what was it, almost 50 years that Franco had power in Spain. What's Spain doing now, guys? Anybody a big fan of Sanchez right now? I don't think they are. And the reason that Spain is so hard left now is because it's still 50 years later. Franco died in 75? So we're 50 years down the road and they're still viciously left wing all through Spain in the memory of Franco. So the left knows that these stupid fascist regimes or hardcore right wing regimes or right wing authoritarian regimes will burn themselves out in a number of years. They will piss everybody off with their excesses, with their just, naked self-favoritism, and everybody would be so mad that they know they're going to mop everything up on the other side, but they can use the right to get the Constitution out of the way. So this is why I've always said that this is, the left is going to win every one of these conflicts. If you go fascist, you're going to end up communist within a few decades. It's a guarantee, which is why this woke right reaction, like we're the only solution, is actually like, I bet some of these guys actually believe that shit, but the people that are pulling their strings know it doesn't work. They know what's going to happen is they're going to just accelerate back and forth more and more and more vigorously until the thing breaks. And then once it breaks, it's only a matter of time till the left picks it all up. And so this is the ultimate strategy, which is why I get so much hate, because I'm not trying to argue for moderation. I think we're in a pretty serious situation. We have to use the tools at our disposal. But I am trying to argue for this weird, crazy thing called strategy based on knowing what your enemy's strategy is, like playing the actual game that's being played correctly. And people don't like that, especially the people who are playing the game and can make it look that way. So the accelerationist part you brought up there, Stealth, is extremely important for people to understand. And the fact, not necessarily the details. I don't have anything to say about the details of the things you brought up, and people can go to you for that. But what I can say is that the fact that this is deliberately coordinated strategy, taking advantage, especially of young people in chat groups, especially on Discord and Telegram, is extremely important. This is why you have these weird hide your power level radicals, especially very young ones who are with their heads full of like daggers and shrapnel, basically, that are ready to go out and be as Machiavellian as they need to get into positions of power to basically cause major problems later. And I don't care if you think you're on the right or on the left. If you think using or falling for or playing through Dugin's strategy is going to work out for the United States of America, you've got another thing coming. The whole point of Dugin's program is to do these things on left and right at the same time so that it will break the system that we have and destroy America. He says so, I mean, all the time, everywhere he can. And National Bolshevism is the model that he has proposed, which is basically adopting very Leninist techniques and some of the Bolshevik-style redistribution, but for a broadly nationalist project. And just to be very clear, because it sounds very Nazi, I hate to be fair to Dugin because he's an asshole, but we're not going to misrepresent him. He is explicit repeatedly that he is not a fan of the race ideology of the Nazis. He thinks that the race ideology of the Nazis is what was ultimately their downfall. So it will be based on some other set of principles, whether those are religious, whether those are geopolitical, like in Russia, whether they are some other cultural bond, heritage American or whatever, that becomes the binding root of that nationalist project that will then act like Bolsheviks. And by the way, since that sounds all so, holy crap, that sounds crazy. I'll point out that we've talked about Carl Schmitt a little bit ago with the friend-enemy distinction. Carl Schmitt wrote a book in the early 1920s called Political Theology. And the philosopher Tracy Strong wrote a foreword to the English publication of this book. And in that, praising Schmitt, actually, he's giving Schmitt credit. I don't think he's like hot for Schmitt, but he's more than lukewarm. He's warm to Schmitt. He thinks he's an intriguing thinker, an important thinker. He explains in this foreword that the best way to characterize Carl Schmitt's project, and Carl Schmitt is this darling object, as is viral on X today, again, of the woke right, is to call it, in his own words, right-wing Leninism. He says it is a kind of right-wing Leninism, which would be this national, that's your right-wing part, Bolshevist project or Bolshevism project that Dugin is also advocating for. So, this isn't like little incidental coincidences across multiple lines of literature involving people writing across decades who didn't know of each other. Tracy Strong probably did not know who Alexander Dugin was or wasn't paying attention to him. So it's not like they were necessarily coordinating. But this is the poisoned applesauce that's being fed to our kids in these edgy meme chats that they're all in that are like on Discord and Telegram servers. And some of the names that you named that were involved in Unite the Right and that have been pushing Dugin all along, that are famous influencers in right-wing spaces, some more infamous than others, are like really big on those particular platforms for these particular kinds of things. Like it feels very operational is kind of my last line on that.
You're gonna love. Oh, sorry, Seltem. You're gonna love this, both of you. But you're talking about the Naz Bol thing and so on. So to preface this slightly, the political right in Ireland is pretty much non-existent, right? There's a few thousands of people interested in saving Ireland, and the European Union project trying to get out of that, stopping the mass immigration, stopping the trans, etc., etc. But there are no stable, functioning right-wing groups, right? And there's one group that people keep saying back to me, but what about the National Party? And the National Party is a group that was set up by the figurehead of National Socialism in Ireland, Justin Barrett. It was set up by him, I think, 2016, but he lost control of the party, and there was kind of a coup. They kind of kicked him out or whatever, and they were pushing on with this man by the name of Councillor Patrick Quinlan. Now, recently, Quinlan was kind of having difficulties with the party, and he resigned. But there's a figure in the background in the National Party who's a close associate of Nick Fuentes. You mentioned the Groypers earlier, and that man is Keith Woods, who I spoke to on Stealth Space before. So isn't that interesting? So you've got no right-wing groups in Ireland. We've got one group, and involved there's a figure who was kind of who had sympathies towards Islam. He's openly anti-Israel. He was clearly a bit brainwashed when he was younger with Marxism, and there's a possibility, if depending on how things go, that he might end up in charge of that group, as I predicted a few years ago. It's really quite extraordinary.
So if James finds this DMs, I said that name to him privately in DMs before you brought this up, just as proof as what we're talking about. But yes, they're grooming him to be the leader, and there was obviously a big event that occurred in Rome, where a lot of individuals traveled there for a specific reason on this topic, which I don't want to talk about publicly because, quite frankly, I have people coming after me. What I wanted to know from James is, because the universities are primarily running or training somewhat of a Maoist revolution using Muslim Brotherhood tactics and training. That's what I see, and that's why it's so dangerous. Like this PFLP, DFLP, like the Kala Walsh version, right? Of what all the universities are fully captured right now by this ideological subversion, Marxism, Maoism. There's different qualities to it, but it's specifically training them with the Muslim Brotherhood tactics. There's nothing on the right that's ever going to combat that at all, like that we have organized, even on the far right, other than our National Guard and our military. Where do you see, because me and others who have been fighting this and applying pressure on Linda McMahon, for example, who's completely doing nothing to dismantle the funding and 40,000 professors that should go back to Muslim Brotherhood countries. Hassan Piker, as I've talked about for over 2 years, the Turks were specifically grooming him for years now through the State Department to prepare him exactly for this time, where his rhetoric, getting $1 to $2 million per month just as a salary from the streamline that he's on for a very particular reason. His very violent rhetoric from the left goes completely and that's all Muslim Brotherhood rhetoric imbued into a Maoist revolution. If the Maoists had a Muslim Brotherhood lean to it back in the day, I don't think they would have stopped just with their their current projects. I think it would have spread much quicker and have been even more violent externally from China. What is your thoughts on that? That we have a Maoist revolution going on here, a counter revolution, whatever you call it, or cultural revolution with Muslim Brotherhood tactics and kinetic activity behind it, so to speak. What is your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's the actual big threat, and that's kind of the point that they actually understand it. That's the main fuel that the woke right is using. The woke right is using this idea that there's nothing we can do about this except basically post up and get ready to fight. Which I don't actually believe is true, especially when I see the voter turnout numbers. Like, if you're voting at like 15% in one of your elections, you're not actually exercising all the things that you can do. Like, just try showing up to something. I don't know, but and push that get out the vote. We actually could vote our way out of a lot of this because their blocks are, while they do legally cheat as it goes in most cases, it appears, they don't have the numbers to win if conservatives would actually turn out in good numbers. But it is the big threat, and your diagnosis is right that what you do have is Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood, by the way, is like an incestuous, snake eating its own tail kind of situation. The Muslim Brotherhood kind of reinvigorated itself in the 60s, using the very radical Salafist vision. I mean, they were already radical Salafists, but the very radical Salafist vision of Said Qutb. And Said Qutb was a Leninist before he kind of came back to full-blown Islam. He had studied the Western theories, but in particular Lenin, and he had written this book Milestones in 1964 before they hanged him. That is kind of this, reinvigoration. So there's this symbiosis between Muslim Brotherhood style Salafism. Salafism means that you believe that the Prophet and his immediate contemporaries were the only true Muslims basically in history, and that everybody has to live according to exactly that, or else they're not really Muslims. So, for example, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia isn't actually living properly as like part of the caliphate or the Ummah, so therefore they're not really Muslims. And that's why there's a lot of these weird tensions between these groups in the Middle East as well, and they get exported here to solve that problem in the Middle for the Middle Easterners. But these guys have a very dedicated project, and they are teamed up, like I said earlier, from the communist side with the communists. And they have been sharing tactics and strategies for a long time and infusing those into the neo-Marxists. So Angela Davis said that she was radicalized twice in her education. The first time was in her PhD program under Herbert Marcuse, the father of the New Left, was her PhD advisor. The second time was when she went for training to so-called Palestine. I don't know which part of so-called Palestine she went to. I think she was in Gaza, but I'm not positive. But she was trained in effectively this Muslim Brotherhood stuff. So a lot of the theory and practice, street tactics, organizing tactics, messaging tactics, etc., that the radical left has been using, it's been this like communist Islamist incestuous circle where they're both kind of mixing together. It's like this weird 20th century fusion of radical jihad-based Salafism with Nazism with communism, and it got turned into like a high academic theory and force fed in our universities through all these radicals that were getting into schools and tenured. So this is the basis actually of the problem. And I think that, I worry about it because I don't know what in the world we're going to do about it. What you said is kind of the key piece, though. I don't think it's that we can't do anything about it. It's that I don't think that the people in leadership at either the state or federal level are taking the problem adequately seriously. Like, they're not actually understanding the nature of the threat, that these aren't two things working together. They are one thing that has fused, that, like you said, is using this kind of very Maoist new left tactical arrangement together with this very vigorous and willing to be violent and very aggressive jihadist approach from these rigorous Salafists that Muslim Brotherhood is pushing. The strongest things that we could actually be doing to combat this, I don't want it to feel hopeless. Like, President Trump's already pointing in the right direction. He's just not doing everything he could. One of the strongest things that could be done is to put a really strict limit on immigration that actually takes some of these things into account and really puts pressure and scrutiny on mosques and imams who, while they're free under the First Amendment to say whatever they want, they're not free under the First Amendment to fund whatever they want. They're not allowed to send money to active jihad or to support terror groups, although the zakat tends to get used. I think it has to be used in that way, as a matter of fact. They're not free to keep their nonprofit status, maybe for some of the things that they're doing, et cetera. They could be leaned on, but immigration is kind of primary, I think, in that regard, basically shutting off the tap and getting very, very serious about investigating the foreign monies coming into these organizations and these enterprises, and effectively putting up every roadblock possible to receiving these extraordinarily large grants of money from abroad that would do a lot. The problem is that I think a lot of people are, in on the grift, so to speak, and that makes it very difficult to get them to be willing to shut down the very lucrative grifts. But I think that if we do have either state level leaders or federal level leaders that are willing to take this problem seriously, that we're not out on a lurch and in a lost cause, but we have to get that state of affairs to be the case. We have to wake people up, in a sense, to get our leaders, our representatives and executives to understand the situation with regard to this, and that it is a very dedicated revolutionary movement that has very dedicated goals and is not just going to give up on them or go away. It's we don't just wait this out. I think they could do a lot more, leaning on Piker himself, as a matter of fact, too. But it would also behoove those of us that are more on the thinking, reading, writing, and talking side to start actually very dedicatedly starting to work out solutions that are viable under the provision of the Constitution. I did a post on X the other day, just spent about 15 minutes thinking about it, and came up with about 15 or 20 suggestions that are all workable under the First Amendment, under the Constitution, without having to violate anything that would make this movement against the United States a lot harder, without having to, like I said, violate the Constitution to adopt a commissarial dictatorship position in order to, stamp them out with force and hope the dictator relinquishes his power, like a Cincinnatus or Washington or whatever. Actually, Washington wasn't even a dictator. They just would have let him be, and he didn't want to. So he's a different kind of character. That's not something we should rely on. I think that we need to have a lot of smart people thinking about a lot of creative solutions to the problem and getting a lot of people to take it seriously. The only other thing I can say is that I know some people that are in those spaces, these kind of policy spaces and whatever, and they're starting to take this problem seriously. There are people who are actually starting to care about this now, where I don't think anybody really was before. So, hope is not lost, but we do have to keep the momentum going and put smart ideas into the space, especially to crowd out the stupid ideas, because the propaganda will always be sure to feed the other side with dumb ideas. It's kind of like what Emmett was saying about the situation in Ireland. They want to make sure the grand strategy would be to make sure there are no sane, viable movements that could be opposition. So you eliminate or destroy a sane, we'll call it right wing or conservative movement. And then what you do is you create the pressure where they want the release, where people want to be free from that. And what you do is you put a lunatic like Woods or whatever in charge. So you make sure there are no good options for people who don't like what's happening. And then you provide them with bad options and pressure to go into it. So you can be sure that as if any resistance to this movement comes up, you can be as sure as the sun is coming up in the morning. And since the sun doesn't actually rise and the earth just spins and nothing's going to stop it, it's definitely coming up tomorrow. You can be sure that the second there's any meaningful resistance to this, what you're going to start to see is credible organizations getting infiltrated and targeted, and ridiculous, obviously bad solutions being forwarded as the only possible thing anybody could possibly do. And we have to, like, I don't know how I mean, this is like a pre-political we, because like we're all stupid and just that guy's doing something, let's back him up. Okay. And it doesn't work. So, it's scary. My comment is it's scary. Okay. This is the threat. And we have to figure out how to help people not step in this, given that we're not ready for political and narrative warfare in the first place.
Okay, if I can ask one more thing, Emmett, I think this would be great for the space. I know Amiad Cohen. You had an interview there about the right, the right in America, and I knew of him from online after October 7th. Before you took your trip to Israel, you said something really profound. First of all, the fact that they're learning about the Constitution and the Federalist Papers and everything is a unique thing. But the fight for the soul of the right, so to speak, in America, how do we take this energy that exists in Israel that you felt? And I tried to describe it in the way that you describe it a million different ways. How do you bring that in on the right? When it first came to Twitter, I was very focused on young white Christian boys. People didn't understand why. I didn't even know about this Nick Fuentes thing because I never had social media before. But how do we reinvigorate from what you saw? Like, how do you describe it? Have you come up with a theory or a hypothesis or a plan around infusing that kind of energy where you have kids that are, maybe tattooed, not really like religious, but are still getting married early, still have a belief in God, still believe in the country, still will do Shabbat, and yet will then go out and go dancing afterwards, like so many did on October 7th, and were brutally killed, but still have this relationship with the Bible that's so unique, but also with getting married early and family, whether they like the Likud or not, or even understand any of the four fake cases against Netanyahu, for example. Um, have you thought about that more, about what that looks like, and the phenomenon that they're studying the Federalist Papers in Israel, where we can't even get people here on the right to even read those papers, or how, or anything about our actual history? That's my question to you.
Yep, sure have. And not ready to talk about it yet, but it's coming soon. And I
You're
think people
such
are
a
going to get
tease.
really excited about it.
Such a tease. Such a tease.
I'm
Thanks.
not teasing. I wasn't going to say anything about it. You brought it up. So, yeah, I have thought about it, and I do actually have an idea. I will give you, like, I mean, this is more than I actually
But
want
you
to
can tell
say,
me
but I'll give.
privately. You can tell me
No,
privately.
no,
So you don't
I
have to
won't
tell
tell
me.
you privately. I won't. I just got off the phone with somebody. I wouldn't tell him privately either. So, like, I'm not telling anybody yet. But so one piece that I will. I mean, it's more than I want to say, but I will say is I want you to think about the Declaration of Independence. Okay, so when we think about the Declaration of Independence, I'm about to maybe step in it. I'm pretty confident in what I'm going to say, but I'm not positive, and I haven't checked. I should really check before I open my mouth. But we know that it has this glorious preamble. We know what the point of the document is, that we're declaring our independence, and it starts in this kind of sweeping, not just sweeping, soaring way, appealing to self-evident truths and all of this, and then it goes into a list of grievances. And the thing I'm not positive is I think there are 29 grievances, but this is part of my point. I'm not even positive there are 29 grievances. There might be a few more or less. Okay. The thing is that I know a lot of people who could, to a relatively decent degree, at least articulate what's in the preamble to the Declaration of Independence in the United States, some of whom could recite the whole thing from memory with no problem, and very, very few people who can name even one of the grievances or even know for sure how many there are. So what we've been doing is we have been doing our grievances against, whether it's our government, against the movement, against the mondialists, against Dugin, against whoever, we're doing our grievances, and those have to be there. The Declaration of Independence bothers to write down, we'll say 29 of them or however many it is, writes down a whole bunch of grievances against King George and the fact that they were being deprived of their rights as British citizens, and therefore that they were going to do their own thing. And there's all these things they're mad about. And nobody knows what the hell they are. If you sit down with a high schooler and try to get them to read the Declaration of Independence, they're very interested in the first part, and they don't care about these grievances. Are like interesting, but you kind of have to know the whole story or they're not that interesting. And it's hard for them to put themselves in that position. And my point is that all of this criticism and complaining and tearing down of the enemy and even the explaining of how they think is of limited value. I would say that even though it has to be there, like the grievances on the Declaration have to be there, they are not the vehicle. They are not the thing that people remember. They are not the thing that people care about. They are not the thing that actually moves people to action. And so what we have to do, and as much as I'll say now, is focus on the other side of it. We have to focus on that soaring vision, that ideal, that thing that people, want, and maybe it's something they don't fully trust or believe in, and we have to articulate that side of it. And I think there is a way to do that that's very historically proven and very valuable and strategic, but that's the thing I'm not going to talk about anywhere yet. And I'm going to start trying to develop that and hopefully see if we can't have that out into the world before very long. But I want to think about it more before I say more. But focusing less, we have to continue to, and I'm going to continue, don't worry, to read Milestones or read the Communist Manifesto or read Alexander Dugin and tell people what it says, break down where I see it happening in the discourse, etc., seeing threads or strategies or all of this. We definitely need exposure. We need investigative journalists that are pulling out, Neville Singham funded XYZ or whatever. We need that happening. We need elements like what Data Republican's doing with all of her various works, pulling threads that need to be pulled and making changes that need to change. We need stuff like that happening. But on this kind of culture war side, we need a whole lot less of them presenting something and us telling people why it's wrong, and a whole lot more of us telling people what's right and why it's better. And we have all the information in the world. Like you said, we have the Federalist Papers, we have all of this. It does help Israel that they are fully aware that they are in a war right now, that they are also in a position where they have to kind of define their future, and things are in an uncertain state. They're in a frontier country that's at war. That does a lot to clarify and focus your thinking. I think the founding fathers of the United States understood this too. You will not find them thinking about these issues in the same way in 1765 as you do in 1775, for example. All of a sudden, there's a very pertinent reason that they're thinking about this kind of stuff. And so inspiring young people to care about the founding as possibly the solution to their problems that they are looking at in the world today is broadly to speak of what I would say that my project looks like. And invoking Israel as an example, I don't think actually at the present moment will help. Maybe in the future it will, but right now that's challenging ground with the target audience that we would be trying to reach. But they do at least profess in many cases to love their country. So the antidote, in other words, to critical America theory is not critical America theory. The antidote to critical America theory is America theory. And that's one way of putting it, I suppose.
So much stuff to talk about. I suppose just kind of maybe as one more subject, the whole thing of Islam, Islamo-communism and so on. I mean, looking at what's happening in the Middle East, people on the right should be kind of aware to this stuff. I mean, they have the information to understand, a bit more clearly about what's going on. But we talked about earlier the connection between Islam and Marxism. So you've got two different ideologies. One of them is much older. Obviously, we can't say that communism created Islam because it's been around since the 7th century. It's always been belligerent and so on. And, I think Muhammad was just preaching Islam for the first 13 years of his life or whatever. Then he started to get more direct and aggressive and use jihad, which is effort in Arabic, I think. But so we know all about Islam, but then we have the communism problem. I mean, you marry the two of them. Islam is the idea of, martyrdom and so on, and being a dominant religion. Communism is revolution, attack the oppressor. You put those two together, and of course that meant that after Israel was formed in the Middle East, it's surrounded by a tremendous amount of people who became, over the decades, progressively indoctrinated with these two toxic ideologies. And when I look at Israel, the Palestine situation now, or so-called Israel-Palestine, it's like, in that kind of environment, particularly in Gaza, if people are indoctrinated with these kind of thinking, they're going to constantly throw themselves at the oppressor constantly, which creates retaliation from Israel, and then they end up making martyrs of themselves, which furthers the revolution, and they keep going on the offensive. Like it's amazing that people can't really see this.
I mean, I think that's the thing that we have to expose, right? Is we really have to bring into relief. I had an idea. I never actually executed. Anybody that wants to run with this, I strongly encourage it, especially if you're like into marketing and stuff. I thought that it would be fun to make like branding, like to have this idea, okay, Palestinian culture or the Palestinian cause as a related idea. So you have these two ideas, and then to literally like very aggressively brand those things, but in a snide way. Like you try to like highlight that, suicide vests for children is part of Palestinian culture. They invented them, as a matter of fact, juvenile suicide vests. The reason that you go through all the shit you go through at the airport is for security to the degree that you do. In America, the TSA is because they invented suicide bombing and plane hijacking. So, this idea, though, that the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian culture are completely manufactured artifacts of an Islamo-communist, like, toxic mixture that does have a fair amount of Nazism in it, by the way. Several of my friends in the IDF who have done their work in Gaza have reported to me the number of houses is a very high percentage when they've had to go in or whatever after whatever's gone on there, and they're clearing and securing an area. How many of the houses contain copies of Mein Kampf in Arabic? I mean, so there's very strong elements there. But I think that what we need to actually do is brand for Westerners. We need to do where the left has very successfully made the Palestinian oppressed cause look chic. We need to have like it's kind of chic to understand that Palestinian culture is a manufacturer. Obviously, I'm too much of a nerd for this, right? So I'm not the guy to figure out how to make this brand, but to brand it out in a way that shows the ugly reality while making it look like you're making a positive, fun brand. So it's like a tongue-in-cheek thing, because I've been trying to think for years, like how in the hell it mystifies me how they can pull this off. On October 7th, I was like, Gaza Floyd is coming. I said it on October 8th, actually, publicly, that Gaza Floyd was about to happen. In other words, that Israel was going to be cast into the role of Derek Chauvin with its big, brutal police state IDF knee on poor little Gaza's shoulder, choking him out. And it's going to be a whole like George Floyd-a-palooza, all 2020 BLM bullshit all over again now for the Palestinian cause. And there's just so much of it that's just so manufactured. Part of the thing that has to be crossed is, I think, this branding effort. But part of the other thing is pretty much everybody is ignorant on the issue completely unless they live there or have lived there. And the left has this monopoly on telling their lie about the history. They're telling the literally Soviet anti-Zionist, anti-imperialist line on the whole thing. And that's all you hear. I try to remember back to before I knew anything about the region and like what my state of knowledge was. I try to like go back before I looked into it and came to a clear understanding. And like the amount, if I was representative in any way, the amount of just rank ignorance is off the charts. I would bet you if it was like a scale of 1 to 10 and we went men on the street to find out what they actually know about the region, that their actual knowledge is somewhere like at a 1 out of 10. I mean, it's abysmal ignorance. And then anything they've heard, I almost guarantee you, anything that they can repeat, I almost guarantee you is a line of leftist propaganda. And so that's a vacuum that can be filled with actual truth telling, with this tongue in cheek branding effort to illustrate the cause and the culture for what they actually are, which is effectively communist machinations that were invented to skew the perceptions of Western audiences, while they are actually a deliberately, I don't know how to even put this, or a population that's deliberately used to create a conflict so that they will lose and the propaganda can be then turned against it. It's like this is such a weird culture. Palestinian culture is becoming cannon fodder so that they can make memes about how you were cannon fodder. It's like the strangest thing in the entire world. But we don't have an offensive game or a defensive game on this front at all. And I think that actually equipping people to go out and talk about the real history, talk about the relevance of the 6-Day War, talk about the relevance of the so-called Nakba, the fact of the civil war that then became the War of Five Armies against the foundation of Israel in 48, and to tell the actual history and then how the so-called Palestinian object came into being, what its purposes were, what it's been used for, how that's consistent across now decades and up to the present day, the way that things go and behave, and to tell the story honestly and accurately through vehicles that actually reach people, I think is an absolute necessity. And we're just not doing it. Like nobody seems to be interested. And now they've got, everybody who could reach Gen Z, all the young people, they've got them out repeating the leftist line in right-wing clothing. So we've lost a gigantic opportunity there, and have to kind of make up for it. But I never see stuff about this ever. I never see anybody talking about this. I never see videos on my Instagram talking about this. And I type all the keywords that should be bringing that shit up in my suggested algorithm, and it's not there, which means it's probably not being made, or it's not being made effectively, and it's not being disseminated effectively. So I'm not going to blame the algorithm. I'm not going to blame some tech conspiracy here. I don't think it's actually being made. So I think maybe if we want to fight that perception, we should probably fight that perception. Like we should actually try to do it. As you could hear, I nerded out too much. I'm not the guy to do this. I can tell some of the story. I've done some podcasts to that effect, and that's effective as far as it goes. But there's so much more that could be done that's out of my skill set that I hope people will run with. And I think this is honestly one of my better ideas. So I hope people do.
Great stuff. Thanks, James. And Stealth, would you like to jump in for a moment before I close up?
I want to say thank you to James. I played the Edward Said Discourses video last night in my Twitter space. I posted it on my feed. A couple of other things that James spoke about, NCRI report and the virality of using bots. They did one on Nick Fuentes, Data Republican. It was featured. I retweeted that for him. I posted some stuff about Ireland as well, the stuff that you guys covered. I'm trying to think, there's I'll post the article from the PLA from China, several articles that he referenced as well. So if you guys are looking for some of those references, I'll go back and look and listen to the audio again. I'll put it through AI and I'll grab links that references some of the things that he mentioned. And I reposted his interview with Amiad Cohen when he was in Israel as well. So whatever I can do on that front. And last night I did do a battle space. I hate debating men. Everybody knows how I feel about this, but I've seen this rise in a war against James Lindsay that started, I guess, on Friday was the Sabbath. So I didn't see what happened until Saturday night. And so we're gonna do a space with Phil Magnus, and anybody can come. I'd love it if James is coming as well. But debating some of this with Barbie and myself, who've been covering this phenomenon of the balkanization of the right, and God bless James for his work on the woke right and all the stuff that he did. So we, and the Dugin op, obviously people know what I've been covering on that for over 2 years now. But I think I'll just go to his feed in New Discourses, and you could be trapped in a boat um, with James as your master as well. So there's a trip. By the way, I don't work for James in any way, shape, or form, or for this cruise, nor do I have a coupon code. or a discount code, nor would I ever be trapped on a ship with anybody that I'm sure his fan club will come out. As long as it stays at port, I would go onto a cruise ship, but no, I will never go on a cruise ship. I'm too afraid. And also the defense of him waving a 90-pound sword, the stuff that's going on with individuals from the Blaze. I tried to fight back. I did make I got a lot of heat in my DMs, James, because I said, if the Christians don't want you, the Jews will take you and will pay double. And it got a lot of people very offended. I don't know why. I'm as nerdy as it can. I tried to make a defense also for mathematicians. I spent 2 years of my college years being forced into getting a minor in mathematics because of my dad. But I'd only stayed as a minor because I had greater aspirations for myself, and I was the only female in any of the programs that was attractive, so it was problematic for me. But in James's defense, I don't understand the problem with a 90-pound sword, and I don't understand. There's definitely a defense system been propped up since we went after the burrito comments. You can see I suddenly learned AI while sleeping in defense of burritos, I guess, any kind of burrito, $20 or otherwise. But I'm of the ilk where, and you should watch all these guys on Joel and obviously Jeremy Boring's podcast as well, and support Joel Berry. But I've been defending James against all my mutuals on the right, which I think is very strange that I have to even do that. Like, if you know me, then you understand why I appreciate James's work. And I don't believe in cults, and I'm never part of any cult or group, and I never deify anybody. I'm very, very careful of that. So, but there's this weird phenomenon that's occurring as the run up to midterms comes, and as the JD Vance machinery for 2028 pops up. We're watching it closely. It's not particular to JD Vance. It has to do with this weird phenomenon that us as Jews, we never understood or talk about, is this Catholic integralism thing. And so we're painfully been covering this for about a year now, and Sovereign Michael is another great follow, and we barely talked about it. And I think this is something you should bring James back about, this global sustainability project with the UN, and what the Saudis are doing with it, and how the UN and certain third world countries are preparing for when the US removes itself from the UN conversation. And they have a morning after Trump comes out, a morning after we stop funding the UN as we used to, like, and we send 25 to 65 billion per year. So there's a lot going to be. This can be a brutal run up to 2028. I plan on fully not being on social media because I don't know if I can handle it since I've been on since the medical freedom stuff. But I encourage people to send his podcasts. Some of them are hard to listen to because it's radio, and in a sense, and these are very like dense subjects that are not sexy always. So I try to explain them as best I can, but I consistently fail. So you have to like listen to it, even if you are opposed. Like, I had all the Schmidt people come into my space. Like, I don't know anything about the Weimar Republic. I'm sorry, nor am I ever going to learn about it. It's like my whole family was killed by the Holocaust. Anything that comes out of Germany, including their cars, I'm disavowing for another 100 years. But I'm just saying, so like, but the fact that they're going after James because of a 1920s author, and because they're obsessed with Nat Khan or Hazoni. I've also gone toe to toe with Hazoni, both privately and publicly, in group chats with people. So all this is very inside baseball. It's so nuanced, but the conversation around burritos, and I can't. I'm so allergic to commies or any kind of commie rhetoric. So when I've never heard these statements out of JD Vance, and so I'm going to look at the whole context, as I encourage everybody to do. But I'm not going to play these games all the way through midterms and afterwards to make Trump a lame duck president. And all we're talking about is this weird, obscure, Eurasian Islam movement that's trying to bifurcate the conservative right and destroy evangelical Christians and Jews, and even just liberals who don't want forced religion upon them, but are still voting on the conservative side or believe in the Great America Project. You don't have to have voted all the way through your whole life Republican to not understand what we're facing is active measures against the United States in every single angle. So that's why I support James. And we're going down with, no, we're not gonna say going down with the ship. That's not gonna thing. We're gonna support this. We're gonna ride to the end of this until proven otherwise. So we support James, and you should as well, and others. And if there's something you don't like that he says, just tweet at him. I'm sure he'll either respond or block you or make fun of you, which any one of those three is the great response for those that that perpetually live and die by their responses from James. I think it's like you've got a whole fan cult club, James. It's not like the Cantifa cult. It's different. It's very unique. it's more esoteric than I can understand. But anyways, we appreciate you. And I just thank the opportunity for you guys to come on board and listen.
I have an Antifan club too, and they're mad, and it's funny. Like, it used to bug me that they're all mad. Like, all these people, I guess, like the other day I had a tornado like hit my house, and I was out with a chainsaw cleaning up, and like I came in, and then it was like, all these people are mad at me on Twitter. I'm like, I can't even lift my arms. And I was like, I don't care. This is hilarious. And I've been like totally chill about it ever since. It's just like really funny that they're mad. And I'm trying now to like, I've crossed the line. I realized I'm a folk devil. So I'm like, how do I make them matter? Like, I'm just going to make them matter.
You're really punishing us, though.
hilarious.
But James, it comes like my DMs are a crime scene because of you, because they can't get to you because you blocked them or they don't have your access to. So they DM me, and it's just like, I've never even heard of these people. I don't even know who these people are, and like they're big accounts, but they are like, oh my gosh, like Schmidt and this is, and Deneen and Evola, and like they're really. I'm like, who are you talking about? Like, you're worshiping like people as gods when you should be reading the Bible. Like, it's like the craziest, their obsession, and they're classicists, and they're like, this is what they got their PhDs in. And I'm trying to explain to them, I'm like, you don't understand how to approach mathematicians, my dad included. Like, it's a different, we're of a different ilk. I'm a female, so we don't really, male mathematicians in particular who understand mathematics, and when they dive into another area of subject, like, they're going to have a certain mindset coming from a mathematical mindset. These people that are these obsessed with literature from, like, Soviet Russia or Tsarist Russia or from the Weimar Republic are not going to get it because they never took a math class in their life ever. They've never used a chainsaw. They've never lifted a 90-pound sword. I find it hilarious. I can watch it. It's like therapy to me. I think it's the funniest thing ever. And I get the troll, but like, you have to be, I don't know. I think there's a lot more in common there, and they're just so sensitive. There's this crazy amount of sensitivity on the woke right, James, that I've never seen in men. And that's how I know that they've never, like, I don't know, they've never like chopped wood either. And I don't know, there's something weird there. It's just the amount of femininity that's occurring on the male right now is very irksome. So more sword fighting and more chopping of wood. Film yourself chopping wood or something, or it's really gonna upset them, and make a quote and like just clown on, I don't know, on their ideology. I don't know, or instead of saying to them they should learn how to code, tell them to learn how to do math. Oh, that would have pissed them off so much. Yeah. Anyways.
All mathematicians have a mindset about people who can't do math, which I won't share here because it's very impolitic.
Just so we wrap up here, James, anything you want to add just to finish off here? Anything? So, New Discourses is the primary platform, correct?
Yeah, most of you guys on here, I mean, you clearly know how to find me on social media because you're here. So the Conceptual James thing, but newdiscourses.com is the website. If you're interested in that cruise, the ad is at the top. We will jam out, like I said, for 7 days. I don't really blame you actually for not wanting to get on a boat that's moving stealth, but I will
No,
take that one for
I
the
would
team.
come. I would come if I could. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, if the link is on there. So newdiscourses.com, that's where you can go. And, if your replies and or DMs are a war zone or a crime scene because of me and my posts, I also think that's slightly funny and not my problem. So sorry about that, but not really.
No, I know. It's not your problem. I just never read DMs, so it's perfectly fine. It's okay. Let them keep going. It's like a voicemail that never gets answered.
Love it. Well, thanks, folks, for listening. I appreciate you tuning in. Some tech problems at the start, but we got there in the end. So actually, there will be a high-quality version of this uploaded in the next couple of days. I'm quite busy, but I'm going to edit and process, make it sound all sleek, and that will be uploaded to the YouTube channel, to my X profile, Spotify, and also Apple Podcasts as well. So make sure you follow myself and James and the Stealth, of course, and then our websites are on the profiles. So that pretty much is it. I will be back soon. I don't know what I am doing next, probably another interview, but thank you very much, folks, for listening, and I will speak to you in the next one. Good night.